Hello, Mr. Sheffer. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Tom. I would never call you Tom because I'm your senior, so I'm not.
Absolutely. I'm old school. I've got respect for my elders.
Yeah, and I
Um,
and so do I.
indeed, and nothing but contempt for my juniors.
Exactly, exactly. I'm going to be like that truculent old man. Um.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So we're talking about urgency today.
yes.
So
Mm,
the topic that we're going to be talking about is creating urgency, um, but without pressure. And obviously that ties into closing. So obviously you're creating urgency ultimately to get to that close. But I think the point is to do it without pressure. I think maybe the stereotype of a salesperson is the pushy salesperson, the salesperson that's trying to get you to do something, and that's the salesperson that
yeah.
no one really likes. So
the
it's
the
like,
double glazing man who won't leave the
yeah,
house
yeah. But I
or
think
woman.
yeah. But as I was saying before, I think very early in my sales career, Mr. Sheffer, you told me that
Mm,
the art of sales, when you break it down, is the art of making people to make decisions.
mm,
Sometimes the decision will be yes, sometimes it'll be no. But like I was saying, from the salespeople I work with, their biggest frustration isn't the amount of no's they get. It's the amount of it's people who just don't make decisions. And so I think this
right.
idea of urgency really ties into this concept of how we can make people make decisions without feeling like we're being pushy or putting undue pressure on them. And so, that's the concept I think we're looking at in terms of why urgency is important and how we can embed it into our pitches without being that annoying, pushy salesperson.
Absolutely. I think, and I suppose that you have to the strategy that you should adopt in any sales is predicated on who you're selling to and what decision you'd want from the customer and what is the objective of that appointment, because if you're going into an appointment, the decision might not be to get the sale. The decision might be, should we set up another call with you, or should we set up another call with your colleague, boss, junior, whatever? So really, you've got to have an end plan that you're going towards, which needs to be done by a certain date. So in what we sell different solutions. Some have urgency. Like, for example, if we're having an event and there's a date, it's pretty obvious you have to make a decision by this time, or you would lose the opportunity to be at our event. But when we sell lead generation or articles that could appear, I mean, there is no time pressure really for that. So why would they need to make a decision?
Well, I guess there's no natural time pressure, is what you're saying. So
No,
is it then incumbent upon the salesperson to manufacture or create that time pressure through the conversation with them?
I
Because
think
there's always a
yes.
time pressure on everything. Because inaction can lead to negative consequences. So in that sense, there's always a time pressure on everything. Because if you sit on your hands and never do anything, then there's going to be negative consequences to that.
There is actually that's a good point. Didn't we used to say a decision will be made? It's just that you'll make it or time will make it. But I suppose it's the same. Let's take something that everyone could probably relate to. Is okay? Let's say you might want to say, I've decided in the new year I'm going to get fit. I want to. That's probably a big one, isn't it? Because you can see the numbers
That's exactly what I'm going to do actually.
in the new year.
Oh yeah, in the new year I'm going to get really fit.
Yeah, not
Like,
now. Why
no,
now?
no,
No, not
that's
now.
just
You don't
not in
need
the
it now.
build up to Christmas. That's
No.
ridiculous.
But that's why the gyms are packed in January and February, aren't they? And then suddenly come March, they're all empty again. But so what is the driving urgency? Why January? What drives that urgency or that particular reason that people make a decision? And I think if we look at that from a psychological point of view initially, why does someone make a decision in the first place? That may help people to understand why people make decisions from that perspective. So I think we talked about this in, I think, a couple of episodes ago, which are, we have sort of 4 questions, need answers. You know, what do you want? What's the reason you want it? Why, you know, that's the why. When do you want it? And what's the biggest obstacle that's going to stop you getting there? So if, for example, you haven't conveyed in the sale itself a desire for a particular outcome, and the pain that's going to be associated with not doing it, if those two things aren't, if the customer hasn't really crystallized that in their minds, you're going to find it more difficult to get the customer to make a decision, because what's the benefit of them making a decision? They might as well carry on. And I think in life, or in business sales, it's easy when someone's system's broken down. You know, your TV's broken down, I need a new TV. That's pretty easy. But those situations really only account for maybe on average 5%.
Yeah.
Whereas 95% of the time, their systems are running adequately. Your TV's fine. You can, it's, you know, but why would you upgrade? Why would you need a new TV? What's going to be the drivers that are going to
So are you kind of saying if you do your job properly in a pitch, in terms of kind of the philosophies that we're espousing here, in terms of understanding their needs, the consequences of those needs, the implications, through that process, a natural urgency is going to emerge, because you're going to start looking at problems, challenges, and it's like, well, once you've started identifying these problems, it's like, well, yeah, I need to solve this. You know, this is important, and then from that you can build. It becomes a lot easier to build urgency.
Yeah. So we were talking, there's a few things that we'll talk about in a second, but I mean, literally today when I was talking to some of the salespeople, they were saying, oh, we get emails afterwards because and saying, oh, you know, we decided not to do this, or we have to park this at the moment because we're going through some structural changes. And they were saying, is this true or not? I don't know. I mean, it may be true, it may not be true. But if you did the whole pitch correctly, and you created urgency, and you got the desire that things were going to be better, then it wouldn't be that logical why they wouldn't want it now. I mean, it may be true, it may not be true. So it's quite difficult to understand whether your objection is true if you didn't do the sell correctly. But
Yeah, that kind of thing is a soft no, isn't it? You know, I think sometimes people don't like just giving a hard, blunt no. It's like,
well,
no, we don't want to do it. So they'll say something like, just going to park this for now. You know,
yeah,
maybe this
exactly.
is something we'll consider in the new year, or, like
Right.
yada, yada, yada. But it's just a no, I think.
The test of whether it's true or not is whether they contact you in the new year, or they're happy to talk to you in,
Yeah.
but
And I
I'd
think
say
we've been
most
in
of the
enough
time you
circuit.
won't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. They never do. Well,
So
I never, but they rarely
no.
do.
So creating urgency from the dot is what we're talking about. But even if you do everything correctly, even if you create a desire and the consequences, you'll still find that some people just aren't brave enough to make that decision. So what's going to tip them over the edge as well is you're going to need other things that are going to be influencing them. So then it's really trying to prove to them in some ways. So you could convince someone to change their solution. I've been in situations in the past where I've convinced someone to change their solution. They weren't going to, and then they didn't go with me. They went with one of my competitors. So I really did a good job for their competitor. I remember selling photocopies or something, for Canon, and you go back and you say, "Oh yeah, we decided to get something else." And you think, "Oh, wow, well, I did half my job." Um, but but I didn't get them over the line. But so you want to look at what else influences the customer. So you need to bring in certain things that are going to be the drivers. One of the strongest ones would be in our business, competition. What their competition are doing, which is going to be proving that it worked for your direct competition. So that's going to be a massive factor in someone creating urgency. The other thing is if someone else is going to take it off them. So creating urgency. There's a good book by Cialdini called Influence, which talks about different reasons people buy. Obviously, scarcity is going to be a massive one at the end. So you can see recently, I mean, what happened with, Glastonbury tickets sold out within, an hour or whatever it might have been. People are rushing to get it. And with something like Glastonbury, that if you don't get in quick, you won't get a ticket. So
Yeah, scarcity is not always something you can use, though, is it? I think that again, that depends on the product you're selling. You know, like in media sales, when we were selling a print publication and there was only one space left, great. There's only one space left. You have to buy it. But if you're selling a product, or a piece of software, there's no scarcity there. So is that something you can't
um,
always use, or is there always a way to bring scarcity in?
I think there's always a way. I
If I'm
think.
selling a software platform to a company, it's like, oh, this is our last software platform on the internet. It's not
No,
really an
you
off
you
the
might
shelf.
you might not be able to say this is our last software, but you might say we won't be able to. If you have a big software package, it normally comes with a plan to um, import it into your current system. So there will be programming involved. So you might say we won't be able to dedicate the time to do the programming to put this in until this date because we're chock a block. So you can take it,
Okay.
but I can't. I don't. I suppose like a wedding venue or something. Yeah, you want to book a wedding at the Savoy. Yeah, there's only a finite amount of dates, but in terms of software, you could say, yeah, I can't. I won't be
You
able
can
to
talk about,
implement this
yeah, okay.
until
So
this
it's almost
time.
like a scarcity of resource.
Yes, you'd have to have a
It's like,
scarcity of
yeah.
resource.
So we've only got so much resource. We're speaking to lots of customers, and this is probably where you can bring competition into that as well.
Yeah.
To say, and so if you want this solution implemented within a certain time frame because of the finite resources that we have, then we need to make a decision quite quickly. So that would be maybe
Yeah,
an
if it's
example.
not the
Yeah,
product
that's
itself,
quite
it
good.
could be a scarcity of resource. I think also, I mean, I remember when Concorde decided that they were going to stop flying, and then they announced it because they couldn't make it work commercially. And then you couldn't get a Concorde flight at the end. Everyone wanted to take um, that last flight. So um, you know, I think I suppose price could be um, used as a kind of like, for example, we're upgrading a system which could be a lot more money, but if you take this one now, we're still doing it at that rate. Or price goes, I suppose, price inflation. You were putting our prices up in February to take advantage of
Well,
this now. Could be another
yeah,
solution.
because like there's lots of tactics, aren't there, that you can
Yeah.
use? And price, like with price, there are lots of tactics, and I'm sure a lot of salespeople would say, if you make a decision, like incentivizing someone to make a decision by a certain point using money. So
Yes.
if and that could you can do that whenever you want, and it's like if you make a decision by this
Yes.
date, I will give you a 10% discount.
Yes.
That's like more a very that's probably one of the cruder ways to build urgency, but there's no doubt that it's effective.
No, it is. It is. We'll look at the fact that, obviously people have sales because sales obviously don't last, or they
Yeah.
shouldn't. They
But
seem
I
to
would
last
say,
quite a lot online.
but you don't want to build a strategy that just relies on that as your kind of go-to way of putting urgency in. Like it works, it's a good tactic, but I think you're better off thinking about urgency more, and I'm going to use a word I don't like, but holistically. So embedding urgency all the way through a pitch rather than being like a tactic that you throw in at the end to say,
Mm,
make a decision by this date and I'll give you a discount. It's more about making sure that you're thinking about urgency from the first moment of the contact to the right through the process, all the way through. And then
yes.
it's going to be more impactful.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, but one of the things that Cialdini says actually as well is that if you use scarcity very early on in the pitch, let's say you went in and said, "Look, I'm giving you a call. I've got this. We've only got three left, for example, whatever." He
Yeah.
said that tactically that doesn't generally work. He said it's not good to put scarcity right off the bat because immediately you're putting the pressure on someone.
Okay. So that's interesting. So then what are because I believe that you should be embedding urgency from the very beginning, but going in too hard with scarcity is it, according to Cialdini, who far be it for me to argue with Cialdini,
Mhm.
what would be a good use of what would be a good foundational urgency to include at the beginning of a pitch?
I would, um, you, you could go in with the campaign being, let's say I'm trying to think what different products, different things. But I think when you go in at the beginning, I try to convey much more of a heavenly beginning. So this is the zeitgeist. This is happening at the moment. We've got a lot of interest. So I'm implying scarcity from the beginning by the fact I'm busy. So, for example, if a
Yeah,
salesperson gets on the call, I mean, at the beginning of the call, let's say most calls that I listen to, the beginning bit goes something like, especially if you're English,
surely the
um,
weather.
the weather, absolutely. And it normally goes from really good to immediately to not bad in a heartbeat. Normally, it's like, how are things? Yeah, good at the moment. Yeah, yeah, good. I'm fine, fine, not bad, not bad. I mean, it's amazing how you can go from great to not bad in a matter of a heartbeat. But also the weather, and British people tend to sort of complain a little bit at the beginning. But
We
if
haven't really talked about the weather on any of our
no,
episodes
we
yet.
haven't talked about the weather.
Very
It's
un-British.
it's getting a bit colder now.
Next
Um,
week's episode, we'll start off with a bit of weather chat.
well, exactly, and how to be British. So, I if you started the call with something like, "How are things at the moment?" Let's imagine you're hugely successful right now. You're doing 7 pitches a day. I remember when I was at Yellow Pages and I was doing 7 pitches a day, and I'd go around, and it was incredibly. It was one of those things that was a 2 week campaign. We were selling a particular product, and it was an expensive product, and I would see literally 7 or 8 people a day. Um, and so when people would ask how are things at the moment, it goes, "It's crazy. This is my 7th pitch today, or this is my maybe not pitch I said, but I've met 7 people today, and I've got 3 more to go. So it's absolutely, um, chock a block right now, which seems to have garnered so much interest. But then I'd always push and pull. So I'd say, but let's see if it's right for you." Okay, and then we'd go forward. And because of that energy, it was almost like, everyone's interested. So it's just a matter of case. So I think you can create urgency with a certain amount of
So
assumption.
it's just I guess kind of what you're saying is forget about what you're saying, or not forget about it, but if we put that aside, um, the energy that you bring to the conversation and the beginning of the
Yeah,
conversation and how you're putting yourself forward, that is going to have an impact on kind of the level of urgency you can then push through
yeah, absolutely. So it's got to be this
it.
kind of inner confidence that you go in and you're energetic, but at the same time, if you don't do it, don't do it. I don't care. So
And is it,
that's a hard balance to get. You
yeah,
don't, salespeople go, "Oh my God, how," and they get too enthusiastic, which is not genuine. You've got to be genuine in the sense that if you imagine that you have just brought in 20 deals, and each of those deals are X amount or whatever, and everything is going your way, everything's coming up Turnbull, and you go in and you have that kind of inner confidence. The customer doesn't know whether it's true or not. They have no idea whether you've done 7 appointments or this is your first appointment for 3 weeks.
yeah,
So going in, with that inner confidence that everything's going your way is, going to immediately get the customer to think, "I don't want to miss out."
yeah. So if you were speaking to a salesperson, is it fair to say you're almost look because sometimes you are flying, sometimes you don't have to
Absolutely.
imagine it. Sometimes that is genuinely the case, and obviously success builds upon success, and the best time to do a deal
Yeah.
is just after you've done a deal. We always say that.
Right.
But in the absence of that, we are saying to the salespeople they have to kind of play a bit of a role. They have to
Yeah.
put themselves into the shoes of success and to transmit that kind of energy. That there is a
Yeah.
mindset thing that they need to do, a
Yeah.
kind of
And I
fake
and I
it till you
just want
make
to
it.
say, from our friends out there that say, well, I'm not going to say I've done 5 appointments if this is my first appointment. I just don't feel comfortable with that. Then come up with something that
Yeah,
did make you. So we used to say to one person, he didn't want to do that. So we said, well, say something positive because you're starting so negative. And he changed it to say, you know, how did, oh, fantastic. I took my child to the nursery today, and it's so nice when they go in and they, you know, they don't start crying, and it was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. But anyway, how are you? So even, you know, just find something that's kind of not,
But that
you know,
probably wouldn't lean into urgency, would it? That's just starting the
yeah.
conversation in a positive way, which is important as well.
Well, it
Um,
depends, obviously,
but
how often he
maybe we'd
takes
have
his
to go and
child, you know, to nursery.
yeah, don't have
I
time.
gotta go now.
Yeah.
Pick my child up. Yeah, you're right. That probably doesn't create urgency. Look, I mean, we, you
What
know, we,
about just setting expectations at the beginning of a conversation? What about
yeah,
just, when obviously you go in, you talk about this, but
yeah, and
then
that's good.
laying an agenda out of expectations on both sides. So look, this is what, this is my plan for this conversation. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to ask from you. Then after that, this is what's going to happen. And then at the end of that, I'm going to ask you to make a decision. And just being very straightforward at the beginning and laying out your expectations
Yes.
and getting their approval and agreement on that. Because then once they've agreed, then you've got something that you can then refer back to later in the conversation. You can hold them accountable for what they've agreed to because you've kind of laid it out in very clear terms what you're going to do, what the agenda for the call is, what the expectation is, and then you've got something
Mm,
that you can always refer back to. I think that's quite
yeah.
maybe useful.
Yeah, very much so. I think we used to call this setting the agenda or setting the scene,
Yeah.
which goes along something like you've said. I mean, I used to when I was doing the 7 appointments day, and it was genuine. The customer, as I say, didn't know it was genuine, but it was. I would say on the phone, when I come down, I am seeing 7 people a day. So the one thing I want you to do at the end of this is tell me whether you want to go ahead or not. If you do want to go ahead, I used to use the words, we'll get you safely booked in.
Hmm.
And if you don't, that's fine. I will always wish you well. Are you able to make a decision there and then? And I remember one person, everyone said yes, because I said otherwise I just don't have time to come back. I'd always give a reason. I think when you're going to ask for something that's a little bit more sensitive, give a reason and you'll get better results. So my reason was because I don't have the time to come back, and we're doing a promotion and it only lasts 2 weeks. So I gave scarcity, I gave a reason, and I do remember I got to the end of the pitch and the person said, I want to think about it. But I'd set it up in such a way that said, I need you to make a decision now and then. I said, and I literally said, no, I did say on the phone, there is no thinking about it. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. But what I did do, as I said, I'll tell you what I am prepared to do, though. I will put down that you can cancel this time tomorrow. You've got 24 hours. And if you decide not to do it, but I don't have time to come back. I literally don't have time. But if you want to cancel it in 24 hours, that's fine. I won't, I'll just rip the paperwork up, but I just don't have time to come back. So let's sort the paperwork out now, get it done, and give you the option. Is that okay with yourself? Fair? And he went, yeah. And in the end, he didn't cancel. But, you know,
So that's a good example of setting the scene, setting expectations, and getting them to agree, and then leveraging back to it. And that's quite a hard close, I would say.
it was very hard, yes.
Yeah, but I would say in a lot of sales situations, you probably need to have a strategy a bit softer than that. I would suggest. Not in all, but I would say, you're not maybe going to be able to get people to, if it's a complex product, multiple stakeholders might need to be involved. They might need to see different options, etc. It's less practical and likely they're going to make that decision there and then. So you're probably not,
Yeah.
you're probably going to be setting the scene in a slightly different way
Well,
than
that's
just
right.
like,
But
you've got to make a decision now.
that's true. But I I think the decision that I'm asking them to make in this instance, because the other thing, it was only 250 quid a year. This is going back 30 years, but it was still cheap, really.
Yeah.
Um, and
Good,
if you,
good value is the way I
good
would have
value,
positioned it, Brad.
brilliant value. But but the point of the matter is, if it's, should we call it a punt, or you're buying something, mate, do it now, don't do it. I don't, you have to understand your cost of sale. But if your decision might not be signed today, your decision might be, let's set up another meeting with someone else in your department, or let's whatever that decision might be, that's the end game that you need to focus on. So when you go into sell, you need to know what your end goal is.
So I think one of the important things is just to set a deadline.
Yeah,
And sometimes you mentioned like with events or with something along those lines. There's a deadline built into the conversation, which is really useful when you can leverage that. But
yeah,
in the absence of that, I think it's within the salesperson's power to put a deadline in place,
yes,
and it can be arbitrary. You don't, it can be an arbitrary deadline, but just having a deadline and agreeing that deadline with the client, then you've got something to refer to, something to hook onto, something to keep them accountable to, because it's something that you've agreed. So just having a deadline, for whatever reason it is a really important thing to try and put into the call. And then just saying,
mm,
okay, my aim is for us to go through this process and make a decision by this date. Does that work for you? Yes. And then, okay, like obviously yours was you need to make a decision in 45 minutes, but I guess you can. So that was your deadline in that example. But
yeah,
that the important thing is having a deadline that you can then hold them accountable to. And I think
absolutely.
that's important.
Yeah, I think if that's the way of creating urgency, um, so I suppose all of the things that you need to do to prepare before is, look back, what have their competition done, what um, what would be the benefits to them and everything else. But I suppose in an ideal world, yes, if they see the benefits, they see there is a positive risk to reward, then yeah, of course they're going to make a decision quickly. Um, but I suppose when it comes to the end, it's how do you make people make decisions? And I think that's the essence of this particular episode. And you used the word holistically, which I was told off
Sorry,
for. I was told off for
sorry,
once using that.
I couldn't think of another word.
No one can. So the the thing is, make people make decisions on small things through the sale. So if you've done the sale long enough, you should know every single objection that comes your way. You should have them. You should write them down. They're very predictable. So when you're creating decisions along the way, it should be what are the reasons that they need to decide upon to get the deal, and close them on each of these ones individually throughout. And when it's when you talk about commitment to that, we're asking someone, and we go back to what we said before, is what do you want? So a question that could almost like, so you um if you if you could get in front of these people because of these reasons, is that what you want? Or if you're selling a photocopy, blah blah. So if you were able to do this because of that, or if it's software, is that what you want? And the more commitment to what they want that you can get through the pitch, then it's going to be easier to close, because you're trying to find out what do you want that you don't have today. So you want all of these things. Why do you want those things? That will tell me the motivation. And when do you want to be able to take advantage of these things? Well,
Yeah,
and that's,
because
and if they say, well, immediately, then why are you not making a decision? Well, I'm confused now.
yeah, because I guess when we talk about urgency, what we're talking about is making our sales cycle shorter, aren't we? Because
Yes,
we want people to be comfortable to make a decision full stop, but urgency is about making them make that decision faster. And I guess
absolutely.
part of that is we need to position a benefit to the client of make what is the benefit to them of making that decision faster. It can't
Mm,
just be because of us. You never want to position it like make a decision because that's what I want as a salesperson because it's better for
yes.
me. It's what is the benefit to the person that you're speaking to for them to make a quick decision. And there's a whole host of reasons that we can use of to why it's good to make a decision. You
Although
know,
we did have that one salesperson who said, could you make a decision? Because I'm up for the top salesperson. I win a trip to Paris. If I get,
I've
yeah.
I've done that before. I've done. I I did a deal with a bank, a large bank. I can say it was Royal Bank of Scotland. And they'd agreed. They said they were going to do it. Like it was all done.
Yeah.
And then I was there. It was the end of the day on the last day of the month, and but I did I didn't do it as a personal thing. I said, if you sign the contract today, we've got a team target that will go out on a team building exercise, go-karting, if we can get this over the line. And she was like, oh, and she signed it within a minute. She just went and signed it straight away because it
Yeah.
wasn't just me she was doing it for. It was the whole team
It was the
that
whole
was,
team's
yeah,
go-karting
um,
experience.
yeah, that
Yeah,
was years
absolutely.
ago.
And so they can be those emotional drivers, but obviously, she was 99% bought in before that.
Well, that wasn't the reason she did it. That wasn't, it was
No,
everything
that was the reason
was
she did it. That was the reason
no,
she
everything was
signed
decided. That
urgently.
was just the reason she signed at that moment on that day.
I,
That was
well,
all that was.
I suppose you could yeah, that's why she prioritized you
Yeah, exactly.
over some other salesperson who didn't have a team night out. So that other salesperson who was simply just greedy and wanted his own commission,
Yeah,
he lost
exactly.
out,
And we
or
know
she
who that
lost out.
salesperson. I know
We
who that salesperson
Exactly.
is.
So I think fundamentally this whole thing about creating urgency is, there are a lot of tactics, you say, and strategies you can use. Um, and fear of missing out is the one that's going to be very powerful. Um, but obviously start thinking about, but don't go in too early with that. But you can set expectations. So if you are maybe in the software game, I've never really sold huge softwares, but maybe the resource thing could say, look, it depends what you go for. If so if you are looking, let me talk about when you want this, because there's only a certain finite amount that we can do in a year, just from a pragmatic perspective. So let's talk about what you want. But I'd always preface it by saying, but look, if this is not for you, then obviously don't do it.
Well, I guess depending on the product you're selling, your tactics and strategies are going to be a little bit different. But I guess the fundamentals and the principles that you need to go back on is around positioning the urgency as a benefit to the person that you're speaking to. So scarcity is obviously the fear of missing out. There might be some price incentive. It might just be simple that, it's good to get this off your desk, and then but then you've also got the psychology of, like you mentioned, New Year. Like it's not a coincidence that a lot of our deals close towards the end of the month, the end of the quarter. It's a natural thing that you hook onto. More decisions are made on a Friday than a Monday. It's because and then there's a psychology to that we have to be aware of, and we can use it to our benefit. Because
Yeah,
that's how we tee things up, all the way through.
right.
But we have to set expectations from the very beginning that this is a process that requires a decision and get
I
their
think
buy-in very early.
absolutely. It just occurred to me just now. I wonder how many salespeople actually say, before we begin, let's go through this. Everyone's busy. When do you think? What's the buying process? When do you think a decision can be made? Can we put something in the diary now? I mean, and also salespeople have their own time frames, what they feel comfortable, so they'll
Yeah,
say, oh, can we schedule and the other thing, it's got to be congruent, because you hear some salespeople that say, oh, it's really urgent, you have to make a decision. And so, are you free in a couple of weeks? And you think, well, how's that
100%. I think,
obvious?
you have to be really consistent. It's no
Yes.
good like being like urgency at the beginning and then urgency at the end, but then a bit, plodding along in the middle. Like you have to be really consistent with that narrative of urgency through every step of the sales process. So if someone sends you an email with a bit of a buying question and like that, respond quickly, strike while the iron's hot. If you take 24 hours to respond to a buying question, what are you saying to the person that you're selling
Yeah.
to? You're saying that, okay, there's got to be an energy and intensity to the way in which we work that transmits busyness, that, this is fast moving, this is fast paced, and we need to try and move this process along. And I think you
Yes.
need to carry that energy in everything you do, not just the first pitch, in every interaction that you have, be that email, messaging, etc. I think that's where, you that's where you can lose it. If you falter from that urgency narrative at any point in the pitch, you can lose it. So it's like maintaining that is important.
And I think one last point, is that salespeople have to take responsibility for their recommendations. So, quite often I hear the salespeople say, oh, do you want to do this one, that one, that one? And they give you choices. I mean, I even went to a doctor to get for my diabetes, and they said, "Well, would you prefer this medicine, that medicine?" And I'm thinking, "You're the doctor. You've got, one of the things Cialdini talks about is authority. Have some authority. So at some point, you may need to say, look, I tell you what you need to do. You need to do this one, and this one because of these reasons. Shall we just go ahead?" And
Yeah,
sometimes urgency is created by just an absolute certainty on the salesperson's behalf. This is what you need to do. Are we doing it?
yeah,
And really just stay silent after that. We can talk
yeah,
about closing
absolutely.
up episode.
There's just a point where you've got to be very direct, very bold, and say, right, this is it. And I think we've talked about this a lot, that some of the best salespeople, and well, maybe all of the best salespeople we know, are the ones that are able to be very direct and quite blunt when
Yeah,
the occasion demands it. And I think
absolutely.
that's a huge part of it as well.
Well, very nice. I will thank everyone for listening. And obviously, if you have questions during the episode, now we've got it on live now. So we've opened up a chat box. So please ask questions as you're watching it. If you watch it on the Business Water site,
Yeah, and I
that's the way
think
to
we're
do it.
we're going back to objection handling next week. I think, are we, Mr. Sheffer? Unless you have any problem with that. But
Unless I have an objection.
yeah, but I feel maybe I could probably
No?
overcome it if you did.
Okay. Well, let's find out if you can. All
All
right.
right.
Have a good one. Bye bye.
Cheers.